Good evening, I'm Pinky Webb. Tonight we ask the questions, we tackle the issues, we clarify matters, and we get on point. Lawmakers have raised the alarm over a 40% stake a Chinese firm has in the National Grid Corporation, or NGCP, as well as the presence of Chinese nationals in key positions in the company. This, they say, may be a threat to national security. Lawmakers also raised delays in many of the NGCP's projects, forcing power producers and the public to lose billions. Now Congress is studying if NGCP's franchise should be revoked and if management and control of the country's power transmission be returned to the government. Let's get on point with NGCP spokesperson, Attorney Cynthia Alabanza. Attorney, it's good to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Pinky. I'm happy to be back.
You were supposed to be with us yesterday, but the decision, of course, a better decision was made to have Congressman Dan appear yesterday so that we can talk about his opposition, supposed violations of NGCP. And here you are today to answer these supposed violations. I'm going to start. Our conversation yesterday started with this IPO where Congressman Dan was saying that when the franchise was given in 2009, in a span of 10 years, the NGCP was supposed to do an IPO, or an initial public offering, which the NGCP failed to do, and in fact, changed it to what was called a share swap. Tell us about this.
Okay, I've been wanting to have some time with Kong Fernandez just precisely to explain. Maybe the information given to him wasn't complete. The share swap wasn't the end to that process. It was actually in preparation for the eventual offer to the public. If you go back to the franchise law, RA 9511, Section 8, it allows us two modes to for share dispersal. One is a direct IPO of NGCP of 20% of its stocks, or an indirect IPO of any of the companies owning equivalent of 30%. So the share swap, yes, it did happen, but that was to ensure that the company that did the follow-on offering, which is Synergy Grid, which is now publicly traded, has a stake in NGCP equivalent to 30%.
So this is where the indirect comes in.
Yes,
Tama ho ba, Attorney?
that's absolutely correct.
Let me summarize that again. So in the deal, it didn't just say IPO.
Right.
It said, you're saying now that it could be direct IPO or indirect, to which this indirect pupumasok si share swap
correct.
in 2022.
Yes.
So this was part of the agreement?
It's in the franchise law.
Okay.
So in other words, and we were very, very cautious. So every step we took, we went to the government, we went to the relevant regulatory agencies to seek guidance if what we were doing was compliant with the law. Because, you have to do it well, and you do it once, you do it well. So, we didn't have to go back and we didn't want to have to argue whether it was compliant or not. So the share swap was part of our efforts to ensure that we were compliant with our franchise.
Why was there a need for a share swap?
Because the law says that if you're not going to IPO directly NGCP shares, and there's a reason operating companies aren't usually traded directly. If you're going to do that, there has to be the company that eventually does the follow-on offering or the IPO has to own 30% of NGCP. So we had to do the structuring to ensure that the company that went on trade owned the 30%. In compliance with the law.
Which is Synergy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you still doing an IPO?
We finished the FOO already, the follow-on offering, because prior to the share swap, SGP was already publicly traded. And let me go back to that. I think Kong Dan mentioned it, we were given 6 months to comply. And it was easier to do a follow-on offering than do an IPO altogether. So we chose a company that had been previously traded in the stock exchange. And then we just needed to ensure that they owned 30%. So, and that's where we were. We after the share swap, we determined that SGP already had enough shares to have that shareholding at the NGCP level, and that was the one that was put on follow-on offering. I think that was in 2022. So that was deemed compliant.
He actually did say 2022 share swap happened I mean, its conclusion, I believe, happened in 2022. So you're saying there was no violation there?
That's our position, of course, because we were very, very prudent in what we did to ensure that there was no violation.
Siguro the question would be, Attorney, why didn't NGCP just comply with an IPO?
Again, there are many ways, there are many reasons that operating companies aren't traded because it's very volatile. But having said that, it was an option, and it was an option that we decided to take because we felt that it was the best way for us to comply. Again, we should have done that within 10 years, but there's also an option for us to ask for an extension, which was granted. And when finally they said, no more extension, you have to do it, we just complied.
Okay. The second was what is being called as the concession fee.
Yeah.
Kong Dan was saying yesterday that this became very disadvantageous to the government because there was a concession fee that was pegged. I think what he told me yesterday was 75 rather in 2009. When I checked and I did some more research on this, it was at 43.75, give or take 1 peso difference. So just pretext on this concession fee, NGCP was supposed to pay or is supposed to pay government through PISALM $3.95 billion. Hindi ho ba tama? Kumbaga, we're taking over, pero kailangan NGCP magbayad kayo sa gobyerno ng $3.95 billion on a staggered basis,
Right.
by which NGCP pays 25% upfront, tama ho ba?
Yes.
And then yung balance na 75% payable in 20 years. So,
Yes.
ang sabi po ni Congressman Dan, yan pong 75% na yan was pegged at 42.75 or 43.75. Clearly, very disadvantageous because right now, it is the peso to the dollar is at 58, 59, 60 pesos.
I don't want to hazard a guess as to the wisdom of those terms, no? But I do want to underline that the concession agreement, that wasn't negotiated. This was a contract that was presented to all bidders. It was done in open public bidding. And the contract that PSAM sent out was a take it or leave it contract. They presented the terms. They said, take it or leave it, you have to bid. So I don't want to hazard a guess as to the wisdom behind pegging it at that, but it was a requirement of government that we sign that contract. They were the ones who drafted it.
100%, black or white, yes or no. Ganun po, yung
Yes,
kontrata.
exactly. In fact, when you go into the bidding, I remember, so they give you the bid documents, including the contracts, and then they put an acetate over it to see if you moved even a single period. It was just to ensure that nobody changes, you can't go back. No, this is the one we signed and you accepted. They made sure that the documents they gave you, including all the terms for the concession agreement, was signed as is. So
you don't want to hazard a guess, but obviously, if we go back to sometime 2008, 2008, no? Would you say that it was a sweet deal that was being offered to anybody who wanted to bid?
Yes, it was an attractive deal, but there were also many risks. One of them is right of way. At the time, I think the bid happened, nobody could value exactly how much right of way was spending and unpaid, because there were so many instances where government, starting from the 60s, 70s, would just enter without paying. And that honestly is still biting us right now, because sometimes you go there and government has not given us the document to prove that they purchased or paid for the property, and we have to deal with that.
But
so there are many risks also.
Okay, but with the right of way, was that under the jurisdiction of NGCP or is it Transco?
For the right of way obligation, prior to 2009, government retained it because they couldn't give a valuation of it. Had they sold it with that unknown amount, then they wouldn't have gotten maximized proceeds from the privatization. And at the time, and I recall Congressman Joey Salcedo mentioned it in one of the hearings, he said that they really made it attractive precisely because they needed to maximize the profits for the privatization, not just of NGCP, but all the other government energy assets that government privatized from EPIRA.
So basically, it really was, you were saying that Kong Joey Salceda was saying that they made it very attractive.
They did.
Hence, this concession fee sabihin na po natin, being pegged at 42.75 or 43.75 back in 2009, which by all intents and purposes, we'd think that as the years progress, the peso will depreciate. I guess that would have been the forecast, hindi ho ba?
Right.
Na it could have been deemed less advantageous if the 75% na balanse dun sa 3.95 na kailangan bayaran ng NGCP and $3.95 billion, just to be exact, ay dapat prevailing, kunwari, currency.
Correct.
Pwedeng ganun.
Yeah.
Pero hindi yun ang nakasulat sa...
Exactly. They could have done that, but they didn't. And that was the exact same set of documents that was given to all the bidders at that time. And it wasn't NGCP or the consortium that eventually became NGCP that was the sole bidder. So this was in no way a negotiated deal. This was a solicited bid, and we complied, and there you go.
Take it or leave it, as you were
Yes.
mentioning a while ago. So
Right.
with this concession fee, it's almost as if somebody was interested back then, that company, that individual or group of people would have deemed it, okay, this part could be good for us, for the business part, no?
Correct.
Okay. Pero yung pong pagbayad ng 25%, is that regular among deals like...
If you notice that we had to pay 25% up front and then the rest of it in 20 years, and our concession is 25 years. So in other words, you advanced a certain portion of the concession fee so that you could have that upfront payment. And ordinarily, you would have it across the life of the concession in equal installments. But again, it was a trade-off, and bidders considered that attractive enough to make a winning bid. Because another thing, I suppose, that is almost lost in memory, is that this was the third. There were 3 failed bids prior to the one where NGCP, the consortium that became NGCP, won and was awarded the concession. So after 3 failed bids, government really needed it to succeed. So I suppose, and again, maybe the better person to answer this would be government itself. That was the reason it became so attractive.
But also, to be very fair about this, is that when was this done? This was done in 2008, 2009. This was the time of the administration of Congresswoman
yes.
Macapagal Arroyo.
Former
Hindi ho ba?
President
Okay, so
Gloria
yung,
Macapagal
ito po
Arroyo.
yung panahon na yon.
Yes,
All right.
that's
So
correct.
there are still supposedly other violations. We're going to discuss that in a bit. We'll have more of our discussion with Attorney Cynthia Alabanza. After the break, please stay tuned. This is On Point.
Ito po si Father Nono.
Ako po si Father Fiel Pareha.
Ako si Risa Singson Kaupeng.
Kape at pandasal na po tayo. Ito po si Cardinal Chito Tagle.
Welcome back. You're watching On Point. Still with us, NGCP spokesperson, Attorney Cynthia Alabanza. Before I leave that topic on the concession fee, Congressman Dan Fernandez was saying yesterday, talo nga yung gobyerno dahil in 2009 it was 43 pesos to $1. Ngayon, nasa almost 60 pesos ano po. When it should have been maximum present, ito yung ginamit niyang word, maximum present value to government. Could there be any violations here? Kasi dapat maybe under the EPIRA law, kailangan maximum present value to government.
Actually, when I heard him use the term, I'm thinking that's not what present value means. It's not, it's actually backwards. You try to value it with inflation, forward-looking, and see how much that's worth in today's pesos or dollars. So that was the computation that I assume government undertook under PISAM when they determined that these terms were most advantageous to them. So again, I can only hazard a guess as to why.
Weren't you around during that time? Weren't you part of PISAM that time?
No.
Where were you?
I was with the Office of the Government Corporate Council.
Okay. All right. So this is the third one, taxes. So that could be very controversial because apparently
Yeah.
NGCP only pays 3% tax compared to possibly other companies that pay what? Corporate income
At
tax? Or-
20+%.
Parang
One
ang
thing-
swerte naman ng NGCP.
It sounds like it's a big, a big discount. But honestly, ordinary corporations pay 20+% on net income. We pay 3% on gross. And because we are revenue capped, and the revenue is determined by the ERC, we don't even determine how much we collect. We're revenue capped, meaning ERC determines the maximum amount of money we can collect from the consumers. Walang tago, kumbaga walang alpas. The government knows exactly how much is going into collections, gross collections. So the tax base here is much bigger. So it's not, you can't compare it directly to income tax, because income tax, the tax base is much smaller because it's net income, less all the expenses. Sa amin wala. Kung ano yung revenue mo, yun na yun.
Gross eh. Would it have been better? I mean, is this something that you could have done some sort of math wherein NGCP would be more profitable if it only paid 3% of gross rather than as compared to 20% of net?
Again, this was the computation that not PISAM but Congress made when it passed the bill. Our franchise is Republic Act 9511, so the 3% is there. And you have to assume that they did their homework, they made those computations, and deemed that this was advantageous to government
So, okay,
at the time.
let's underscore that. Kongreso ang nagpatupad nitong 3%
Yes.
gross income tax,
Absolutely.
tax on the NGCP. Hindi po sinabi ng NGCP na 3% lang ang, baka naman pwedeng 3% lang bayaran namin, dami naming gastos dito. Okay. So again, it was a sweet deal.
Yes. You could say it was a sweet deal, but again, it isn't without risks as well. Because then, yun nga, it's supposed to be in lieu of all taxes and fees. But in actuality, we come across a lot of resistance on the ground. So we end up paying many of these taxes and fees anyway. But of course, under protest to preserve our legal right. But we end up paying a lot of them anyway.
What are these? Can you cite examples? Right of way?
Business taxes, real property taxes. Even though we have a Supreme Court ruling in our favor upholding the clear wording of the law, our franchise here, to buy peace, sometimes we just pay it under protest.
Okay. There was an editorial that I read. I think it was maybe a year ago, wherein it showed, it basically said that it was really a sweet deal for the NGCP. Not that it was blaming the NGCP for that, but, basically it happened, 2009, so 15 years ago. But at the end, at that part of the editorial said that you make so much money. Was it 200 billion for the years, I don't know, 20, let's say 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, ganon. Is that true?
Are we profitable? Yes, we are. Why? Not because we're making more than we should. Like I said, we're revenue capped, meaning it is the government through the ERC or regulators who determine how much we can charge. They determine how much we can spend. They can determine what we can spend. So we make the money out of efficiencies. As with all the other assets, energy assets that government sold off, just a little tweak here, where the efficiencies of a private businessman come in, then you see talaga how improved. Because we
Okay.
kept our expenses also, it's very prudent and almost flat, our operating expenses. So just to underscore how
Okay. So,
efficient it's become.
Attorney, it seems like basically what you're saying is with the ERC there, it's almost like binibigyan po kayo ng pera. Sinasabing, ito lang ang pwede mong gastos, ito lang pwede mong i-charge.
Yes.
Ito lang ang pwede mong gastusin,
Yes.
etc. Kung ano man ang profit doon, swerte nyo na lang. Parang ganun
Kasama
ba
na
yun?
rin dyan, they dictate even the rate of profit. Like an ordinary company, you have a product or a service, you look at how much it'll cost, and then you determine your own markup. And the only limit to that is the appetite of the public, whether they want to pay for that price. With us, it's not. ERC determines everything, what we build, what we spend, how much we can do this. Even our right-of-way is subject to a prudency review.
I see.
So
By the
everything-
ERC?
Yes.
I see. Okay. But so with so much money, I don't know if you're going to correct me there, of profit by NGCP, why are there delayed projects? It's almost as if, or I'll just make it very simple. There are delayed projects. I read 34 out of 37. You're already fined by the ERC of 15 million pesos or 14.8 million pesos. And the other one is that parang palagi may problema NGCP pag may brownout or blackout. Siguro address those two issues.
First of all, NGCP is the delivery system. So if you're going to look back at the data, you will see that the vast majority of the power outages over the last several years are generation related. Yung mga tinatawag nating unplanned generation outages. Meaning, there's a plan, there's a schedule, and then biglaan siyang tumirik. And it happens.
Nag-trip, ganon.
Yeah, it happens really. Any piece of machinery will trip unexpectedly, even though you maintain it. So the vast majority of all the power interruptions that happened because of generation tripping. There are also transmission-related outages, but
What's the percentage of the transmission?
less than 10%, single digits. I think 3%.
Okay.
So vast majority.
So ibig
talaga.
sabihin nun, doon sa mga nangyayaring brownout, 3% of that ay
Transmission related.
kasalanan ng NGCP.
Yes.
Siguro, let's make it very clear.
It happens. Like, things happen like, for example, pag bagyo, may lilipad na punong kahoy.
Yeah.
Sometimes, honestly, animal intrusion. Snakes would climb up.
Yeah.
Sometimes a giant flying fox, the one that's big as a human being, sasabit siya doon. But, yun nga, you have to look at the ability of the company to bring it back immediately. So, we're able to do that naman.
Yeah.
But if it keeps going on, then it's no longer an issue of the delivery system, but of supply. Kasi kami, pag nasira yung delivery system, bilis ayusin yan. Oras lang binibilang. Hahanapin lang namin kung saan nasira.
Nagkaroon ng problema.
Oo, and then mabilis ayusin yan. In fact, even if a tower falls down, we don't need to rebuild it. We have ERS, emergency restoration systems, that allow us to build the bypass lines within days.
I see.
So,
Yeah, I remember a hearing on that bypass line.
Yeah.
So, okay, so pag-usapan po natin yung second point that I was raising, no, yung delayed projects, 34 out of 37 ay delayed. Bakit po? And ang sabi po nila, patuloy po tayo, kami na nagbabayad dito sa mga proyekto ng NGCP, and they continue to be delayed. In other words, Congressman Dan Fernandez was saying that you wouldn't want to even, there's no feeling or appetite to rush projects because, hey, by the way, we are paid, the public is paying for this. Is this true?
Are there projects that are delayed? Yes. But is it within completely the control of NGCP? No. The three primary causes of delays would be right-of-way, permitting, and regulatory delay. What's regulatory delay? I was looking at our data. We have more than 100 projects pending with the ERC, and the average waiting time is 3.5 years. For those that have been approved, the average waiting time, so there are longer waits and then there are shorter ones. For those that have been approved, I think the average approval time is a little under 2 years. So that's the first one. And technically, we're not supposed to be implementing projects without ERC approval. So I keep mentioning about alignment of timelines because then sometimes, more recently, there was a spate of approvals from the ERC, and I was surprised the other one, gave us 60 days to complete. So how can you complete a project in 60 days? The thing is, the reason that's even within the realm of possibilities because we took a risk. Even without the ERC approval, we decided to pursue the project at our risk because the grid needed it. So,
Pinahunahan nyo na?
Oo, kasi
Right.
pag hindi, mas madaling magpaliwanag. Ba't yung inupisan yan, wala pang approval? Kesa paliwanag kung ba't nagba-brownout kasi hindi pa tapos
So
yan.
you're saying approval takes 2 years?
It shouldn't. I think they mentioned this in one of the Congress hearings as well. 270 days dapat. So that's under a year.
Yeah.
But another one that's also part of this very complicated regulatory process is what they call the regulatory period reset. That's supposed to be done every 5 years. The last approved regulatory reset ended in 2015.
What is a regulatory reset?
So that's it's a regulatory period, 5 years, where we go to the ERC. We say, okay, for the next 5 years, this is what we're going to build, and this is the amount of money we'll need, and can we charge this much? So they approved the last one, I think, in 2009 for 2010 to 2015. So in 2014, they should have started from 2016 to 2020, and 2019 from 2021 to 2025.
Got it.
But they didn't. So we're already 9 years in
Delayed.
backlog. Yeah, and how does that affect the projects? NGCP now has no certainty on what we can collect. We've been doing an interim revenue scheme, which again is at a risk to us. That's a risk for NGCP. But again, Mr. C, our primary major stockholder, keeps saying na, this is a public service. Just build it. We can get a recovery later because all of this naman is needed.
Okay, but it's public service that's very profitable.
Yes.
Okay.
If efficient.
Yeah. Let's talk about composition because so many questions on that. 60-40 still? Is it
Yes.
60%
Filipino.
local, and 40% foreign?
Yes.
Here's one thing that could be also very controversial, this system operation. Congressman Dan Fernandez, again, because he was my guest, yes, he said that, balik na lang yung system
SO.
operation sa gobyerno. Sabi ko, could you kindly explain ano ho ba talaga ito? Well, basically, it's trafficking.
Yes,
Ito
correct.
pong pag-distribute ng kuryente. Sabi niya, kung sino ho ba ang nagmamanman? Siguro yun na lang yung tanong nitong system operation.
Okay, first I'll start Why is there even a foreign technical partner? Because government required it. The law required it. It's not like, China went in and said, we want to take over, therefore, ganyan. No, they said there was an opportunity. They asked for a foreign technical partner. All the bidders that participated in the first, second, third, fourth bid had a foreign technical partner. And at the time that they did this, they knew that the transmission system already had a national security interest embedded in it. So they determined, and we have to assume that they did, that the 40% cap on foreign ownership would have been enough protection. We have to assume that because we have to assume government did its job, Congress did its job when it gave us the franchise. So is that being maintained? Yes. Are there Chinese executives? No. Are there Chinese board directors? Yes. Because all investors are entitled to proportionate representation at the board. There's a difference between being a chairman and a board director and an executive.
Yun nga po
Iba yun,
kailangan po pag-usapan natin yan. We're running out of time though
Right.
because there was a question posed by Congresswoman Luistro.
Right.
And in the law daw, kailangan yung executive at saka is it executive managerial?
Yes.
Should be Filipino.
Yes.
And yet, yung nakikita po naming papel that was being shown was that the board of directors, the chairman of the board was Chinese. It said the name and it said Chinese. Could you
Right.
kindly just explain the structure to us?
The chairman is not an executive and is not a manager. He's not in the line. He represents the stake of the investor, in this case, our foreign technical partner, SGCC. And as chairman, he's only the presiding officer. That's why I was surprised because I know Congresswoman Luistro is a lawyer.
She is.
And that's kind of, it's in the law. I mean, it's not new. And it's not a creation of NGCP in our structure. This is not unusual in corporate structures.
Siguro, pag makita mo lang ho siguro yung ganong table na, I think this is the one. Is this the one we're showing right now? I don't really.
Yeah,
no,
this is the
this is
GIS.
Monte. No, but this is Monte Oro. This is
That's from the same document.
Yeah,
The
but there's
another
another
page, yeah.
one that we
It
had
says chairman.
shown.
Oo.
Yung chairman na.
Correct.
Kasi siguro, attorney, pag sabihin mo, kahit siguro sa layman na chairman of the board is Chinese and not Filipino, automatically one could think this could be a violation of the
Correct.
franchise agreement.
Yes, it could be. It sounds like, but it isn't.
Sounds like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where all this fear is coming from. But the thing is, in reality, and there's so many people who ought to know better, a chairman is not it's not even better. He doesn't get a bigger vote. He doesn't get 2 votes. He actually will not vote until there's a requirement.
There's a stalemate,
Yes,
no?
a stalemate.
Dun lang papasok ang
because
chairman.
it's a 10-man board, there are 9, unlikely magka-stalemate.
Yeah.
So he just really presides.
All right. We've run out of time, though. I'm sure there's going to be another hearing on this at the House of Representatives. But, Attorney, thank you so much for explaining this to us. We'll continue to monitor the developments here. Thank you to Attorney Cynthia Alabanza of the NGCP. She's the spokesperson. And that's On Point. Join us again tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. here on BNC, the Billionario News Channel. I'm Pinky Webb. Thank you for watching.